Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank to both of you for being here today. This is a tremendously important crisis, as I would call it, not just an immigration crisis, but a national security crisis. There are only 6 reasons why 13 colonies got together in the first place. 6 reasons, and one of those was to provide for the national defense. And we heard from 6 families this morning. There are many other thousands out there who have similar experiences, including in my home state, with similar tragedies. We both got to work together and solve this thing. We heard this morning that between 2000 and 2014, that over 100 convicted criminal aliens were released and then subsequently arrested again for murder after they had been released. Those convicted criminals were in our communities because the government let them go free instead of deporting them. In 2013 alone, ICE released over 36,000 criminal and illegal immigrants into American communities. These illegal aliens had almost 90,000 convictions on their records, including 193 murder convictions and over 16,000 drunk driving convictions. All told, and I know this is a debatable number, but all told, according to the Center for Immigration Studies, there are over 340,000 criminal illegal immigrants walking the streets right now. I would argue that this is a national emergency. It's absolutely outrageous, in my opinion. I don't think there are innocent parties in this debate. In 2000, my home state, we had a 16-year-old kid killed by an illegal immigrant. Today, 15 years later, the perpetrator of that crime is still at large. This is unconscionable when you hear the stories of these families, but we could bring thousands in here. It's time for us to do something. I just have a real quick question, Director Saldana, and thank you for your service in Texas and now nationally. But if you had this perpetrator in California in your custody, you had answered this question earlier. I just want to ask it again for clarity. What's ICE's policy? What are you driving in your organization? How would you have treated this particular instance where they were released back to the custody of the authorities in San Francisco?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the difference between a criminal warrant and a notice of detainer from ICE, we expect for other jurisdictions to respect the court orders that we get when we get a judicial warrant or a criminal warrant. And so
and what if they don't?
Well, that's not an issue we have when it comes to court orders. We take them to court then and say this individual, this jurisdiction has failed to honor this court order. I mean, that has teeth, right? When it's coming from a federal judge or even a local judge. And then we ask other jurisdictions to honor our criminal warrants that we get in our investigation. So to us, it's a mutual benefit, and we would honor that criminal warrant typically. Now, the Secretary testified last week on something I know he and I are going to have many more conversations about, and that is what more could be done to try to ensure that where we have a jurisdiction that's not cooperating with us, that we work in this case with the Bureau of Prisons or someone else to try to ensure we get custody of that person. I
want to come back to Bureau of Prisons in just a second, but in that particular case, I'm a little confused because, and this is not a trick question, but I want to know that the policy is consistent in your organization about how you would have treated that particular perpetrator, because just last week, one of your senior officials inside your staff told the Judiciary Committee staff that in their opinion, that ICE would have done exactly the same thing as the BOP did in that particular instance, and would have released that individual back into the authorities in San Francisco. Is that pretty much correct? And
that's correct, sir. Here's the deal. Here's how typically law enforcement works. We have a criminal warrant signed by a judge. We call the jurisdiction, or we see that, and we call the jurisdiction and say, is this still a live warrant, and are you going to pursue prosecution? And we work with that jurisdiction. If the answer, depending on what the answer is, we work with that jurisdiction to ensure where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? Is it the state prosecution or the federal prosecution? And that's where that cooperation is so important, and why I truly recommend against forcing these jurisdictions, because that breaks relationships.
I'm not worried about relationships. I'm worried about results. And right now, we've got cities not adhering to federal law. And I just think that's a tremendous problem, whether it's regarding immigration or highway issues. Let me change topics just some more. We just mentioned PEP earlier. You know, we sent a letter, several senators sent a letter to Secretary Johnson a couple weeks ago. We still haven't received a response yet, by the way, but we're concerned about PEP. I really believe that, as we said to the Secretary, it's pretty clear that PEP will lead to the release of additional, maybe thousands of additional criminal aliens from federal custody. And I'm really concerned about what effect that could have, just like we heard this morning. Let me ask you this. With regard to these communities and PEP, given that these communities did not previously honor ICE detainers or cooperate with federal immigration at all, why do we have confidence that they're going to work with us on PEP? Why do we think that's going to be a better approach?
Because of the distinction, the differences that we've weaved into the new PEP program. I mentioned one earlier, and that is we are removing the objection, the constitutional objection, that we're detaining people or asking for them to hold people without a basis. They've already completed their state or local sentence, and so now we're saying, okay, don't hold them 48 hours in the typical situation. Just give us notice of 48 hours before. We've got some differences to communicate to them and to show them, and I think they will make a difference in many cases. And I don't know, I don't remember if I shared with you, Senator, I'd like you to know this. We have identified the top 49 jurisdictions that would have the greatest impact based on their illegal populations. And 33 have already said they're going to work with us in one way or another. And 11 are still in the process of considering it. We're going to keep working that, okay, and that will have a great impact.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, Director Rodriguez, I'm sorry, I'm almost out of time, but I want to talk about the Martinez case with regard to the exception relative to gang membership and the potential loophole. I mean, this seems pretty obvious to me. We talked about this in an earlier committee hearing, but I'd like to get your opinion on, isn't this just another loophole for someone to falsely claim a threat that if they were to go back home, they're under threat, therefore they should get asylum here?
It is certainly our view that you should not be able to use your prior criminality as a way to claim a particular social group. We do think that rulemaking is the right path to resolving the right way to handle this issue, and we can certainly meet Senator and talk more about solutions to the issue that you've presented.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.